Hey everybody, welcome back to Sam's Doing Stuff. What am I doing today? We're continuing with the basement renovation. So to get you up to date, we cleaned out this entire basement, moved all of the stuff out of the way to start working. We're making a storage room first so we can put all of our stuff back into the storage room and have the rest of the basement cleaned up and ready for the next step. So last time we got all the way to where all of the framing was done for that room, and we're ready to move on to electrical and drywall. Okay, everything is cleaned up and we're ready to move on to electrical, but before I do, I want to mention, I'm sure some of you out there that know framing are going to notice that I left that bottom plate all the way across the door frame there. Typically you cut that out. Well, we're putting in a subfloor, and the subfloor is going to be a little over an inch. So I'm going to have that subfloor go right up to that, and if someday I want to continue the subfloor beyond it, I'll cut that out. But for right now, we're leaving it in. And before we start our electrical work, I'm going to just go ahead and say it. This is for entertainment purposes only. You should not work with electricity if you're not comfortable. Electricity is dangerous and it can kill you. There, I've said it. Now, I'm going to go ahead and do this. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to install boxes. Your electrical boxes are typically mounted about 16 inches above the floor, above the finished floor, I should say, and about 6 feet apart, give or take. That's just kind of a rule of thumb. There's actually no specific code as to how high electrical boxes, but 16 inches is about where it is typically. So just a little tip from me to you. You know, I like to keep things organized, and I like to organize my tools in between and clean everything up. Well, I also like to do the same thing with my tool belt. I will take all of the screws and nails I was working with before, put them back in the boxes, because now I'm going to be working with electrical staples, wire, and things like that. So why have that other stuff weighting me down? All right, I'm going to start with my first outlet box right here on this corner. The reason I want to start on this corner is it's kind of a centralized area in the room, and you may need to reach it with a vacuum cleaner or something. It's just a very convenient place to start. So I'm not going to start on this stud right here on the corner. There's just too much going on. I'm going to start right here on this stud. There's plenty of room to work with it. We're going to go 16 inches high, and then I'm going to go about every 6 feet down the rest of the wall. So now that you got your first box for this wall installed, you can go along and you can measure every single one, but I chose to use my laser. Number one, it's going to make it go faster, and number two, they are going to be perfect. So not only do I want switches on the outside of the wall, but I want switches on the inside of this wall, because this is a closet. So we're going to open the door and we'll be able to reach in and turn on a switch to turn a light on in the closet. But I do not want it to interfere with that set of switches that's on the outside. So what I did here is I just save your scrap lumber, because you'll use it. I tacked on a piece of scrap lumber inside here, and I mounted the switch just right where it'll be convenient and you won't bonk the back of your hand. This should work just fine. I mentioned there was one special place for outlets, and that's going to be behind the TV. What TV? Well, this wall right here is going to mount a 75-inch TV, and nobody likes to have wires hanging down. There's an outlet right below it, but we're not using that one. I've got a gangable 4 outlet box here, and we're going to mount it probably about chest high. I know where the center of the viewing area is going to be, so I know the TV is going to spread. It's a 75-inch TV. It's going to cover this whole area. So I'm going to choose to mount this outlet, like I said, just about chest high. Oh, by the way, just so you know, there's these little tabs on the back. Do you see that? This tells you how deep to set your box. So I just line those tabs up with the face of the stud. You can just feel it hit. And that gives you the perfect amount of distance to mount your 1/2-inch drywall. I should also mention that when in choosing where to mount this box, I decided to make sure and line it up with this box. Now we have all the electrical boxes that I want in this wall, at least for now. Remember, I've got access to the other side of the wall, so this is a different situation because I can add boxes later and I can add wiring later, which I will do. So for these boxes anyway, we need to run wire in through the studs, and we're going to use a 3/4 inch spade bit to drill a hole big enough to run wire through. And it's very important that hole has to be 1.25 inches back from the finished surface. That's according to code. It has to be at least 1.25 inches back from the surface so you don't drive nails into it and ruin your electrical. Okay, so now you're looking at me from inside the wall. So right now, I want to go about 4 inches above the box. It's going to be about right here. And now remember, I want to go back 1.25 inches from the surface. That's where code says I have to be. So I'm going to just take it and line it up with 1 inch. Any inch will do. So 5 inches here, back 1.25 inches is going to be at 3 3/4. Let's mark that right there. Now we're using a 3/4 inch bit, okay? So that's going to be 3/8 to the center of the bit. 1, 2, 3/8 to the center of the bit. So where we really need to be from the face of the wall here is going to be 1 inch and 5/8. Let's just go 1 3/4 inches just to be sure. So now we're just going to repeat that process for every stud. I'm going to, of course, set my laser up so that the wire runs straight and true all the way through all the studs. Anywhere that a wire needs to reach a box, whether it's a switch or an outlet, you need to drill a hole. Okay, now that we have all of our boxes installed and all of our holes drilled, we are ready to run wire. Also, I might make a note here. A lot of people might be wondering, why are you only drilling your holes at 20 inches? Okay, putting my boxes at 16 and then 4 inches above that, when typically you would drill them around 28, 29 inches in between where a switch would be and where the box would be. Well, guess what? There's always more electrical outlets than there are switches. So the closer I can get to the boxes, the more wire I'm going to save. I've got plenty of room to go 4 inches out of here and not kink the wire, staple it, and get it into that box. Anyway, we're going to start at the end of our circuit. This is the last outlet on the circuit. Once again, this is just the way I do things. And I'm going to start here and I'm going to feed this wire through my holes all the way down to the next outlet box. All right, so now that I've gotten down to my next outlet box here, I'm going to go ahead and just take some needle nose pliers, poke out the tab in the back of the box, and then I'm going to just feed this wire, try and keep it nice and flat and neat, and we're going to feed it down into the box. You need to have, by code anyway, you need to have 6 inches coming out of the front of the box. So where's 6 inches? Well, let's show you 6 inches here. That's 6 inches. So I don't know how you measure it, but I usually just use my hand, and my hand is longer than 6 inches, so I know that if I at least have that much out, I'm definitely fine. Once you have your wire run into the box and you know you have at least 6 inches out, you're going to just go ahead and staple it. Remember, your staple has to be within 6 inches from the box. Well, our hole is 4 inches from the box. There's no way I can go beyond 6 inches, so I'm good every time. Now we're coming back to the end of the circuit, right here where the last outlet is. I'm going to take this wire that's coiled up on the floor here, and I'm going to run it behind this outlet, knowing I'm going to staple it about there, and I'm going to take this and I'm going to run it the length of my hand right there, and I know to cut it right there, I'll be fine. Now, same procedure as we just did on that other outlet. We're going to poke out the tab on the back of the box, keep this wire nice and straight. We're going to run it in the back of the box and out the front, and we just secure it with another staple. All right, that's good. Now we're going to repeat the exact same process from the outlet we just ran to the next outlet, to the next, until you run the entire circuit. Okay, the whole circuit is wired. I don't have a hotline to it yet. We haven't done that, gone back to the circuit breaker. Like I said before, I am going to power this circuit off of an existing circuit, an existing outlet over here. I'm going to reroute it over here. But for right now, this is done. So the last step is just going to be to take your wire, you're going to bend it down into your box, and then tuck the top of your wires into the box like that. That way they're out of the way, and they won't be touched again until after the drywall is up and the painting is done. So wiring tucked back, bent over and folded out of the way, nice and neatly like that. All right, on to the next step, drywall. I don't think I forgot to show you anything. Electrical is really one of those things you just either know or you pay somebody to do it. So if you're not comfortable, once again, hire a professional electrician and have them do it. But on to drywall. Now, drywall is one of those things that, I mean, me personally, I don't really enjoy it. It's a necessary evil, and I think there's a lot of people out there just like me that just don't like it. But it's really not that hard to do. If you can get your measurements correct, and if you did your framing correctly, your drywall is gonna come out fine. But if you messed up your framing, your drywall is not gonna look good. So let's get to the first sheet. Now I know for my application here, I'm going to need to know exactly how far it's going to be from the subfloor. That's right, we're going to put in a subfloor, I think I mentioned that, up to the height of the drywall. Now a lot of it around here is just going to be 8 feet. I won't have to cut it all. But this is going to go up underneath that metal beam. So you got two choices. You could just use a tape measure, and that is perfectly fine. But I find it's a lot easier to use a laser measurer. This is a Bosch Blaze. I'm not affiliated with anybody in any of these videos. Nobody's sponsoring these. I'm just telling you what tools I'm using. So anyway, you just turn the laser on. I like to hold it with one hand because I don't want the laser to jiggle off my target. And then I'll hold it on to the beam and hit the button. So I got 7'6" and 15/16. You don't have to be that accurate with this. So all I have to do is make sure that when I put my subfloor in, it's gonna be able to slide underneath this drywall and go right up to the bottom plate. So I make sure it's gonna be shorter than that. Another thing you need to know, your drywall does not have to come down and overlap this bottom plate. It can come anywhere up above that because, number one, you're only spanning 16 inches, which is plenty of strength for the drywall. And number two, you're going to be putting baseboard down here or some kind of a finishing trim on the bottom. So you don't have to worry about the drywall being weak. It's going to be just fine. It does not have to sit against the bottom or even the top plate. All right, we know our measurement was 7'6", almost 7'7". So we're gonna just take our tape measure, come as close to the edge as you can. And I'm gonna go with 7'6½". It's gonna give me plenty of room to get that up and make sure that subfloor is gonna fit under it. So 7'6½". Now you're gonna need a straight edge. Because I'm working by myself, I'm gonna go ahead and clamp that straight edge down. Take your razor blade, we're gonna score it. Once your drywall is scored like that with your razor blade, you can just break it. Just like that. All right, so now we have our first piece of drywall cut to height. We know it's gonna fit right here in this spot. So I have a piece of 2x4 on the ground here, the floor, on the floor, kind of pretending to be the subfloor. That'll give us a basic height of where this is gonna be. So let's get this in place. Okay, our first sheet of drywall is kind of up. It's in place. We have to do a couple of things before we screw it in. And one of them is there was an outlet right there. So we need to cut that hole for the outlet. There are several different ways to measure and mark and cut a hole for an outlet. One way, one little trick is you can just use chalk or just use an old piece of drywall, a little piece of drywall that you have scrap, and you want to mark the outside of your outlet box with the chalk. Then you can just simply tap on the drywall, hit it with your hand, and it will transfer that chalk mark onto the back of the drywall, set it back down, and you can cut it out. I have a situation here where there's no drywall on the other side of this wall. It's going to be just studs. It's going to be unfinished. So I'm going to get this in place, and then I'm going to walk around to the other side, and I'm just going to mark the outlet from the other side of the wall. But before we mark anything for that outlet, we want to make sure that this piece of drywall is exactly where it needs to be. So remember, I gave that measurement an extra 1/4 to a 1/2 inch of play. I've got this piece of 2x4 underneath the bottom of my drywall. I'm going to take these pry bars and I can work it underneath that piece of 2x4 and wedge it up and get it exactly to the height that I want it. What I'm looking for at the top of my drywall is that there aren't any gaps bigger than a 1/2 inch. If there's a gap bigger than a 1/2 inch, it's going to be difficult for me to finish with the next piece of drywall, the ceiling drywall, that's going to come in contact with it at a 90 degree. So as long as I have less than a 1/2 inch, that other piece of drywall is going to come up and butt into it, and it'll be just fine. So now we're on the other side of the drywall here in the room that's going to be unfinished. This is just a storage room, and I'm just going to take my pencil, make sure I'm not fat, make sure your pencil is even with the side of the box, and I'm just going to mark the side of the box, mark the top of the box, and mark the bottom of the box. Let's not do that. Well, alrighty then. What you got there is a nice looking wall. Nice and straight, everything went pretty darn well because the framing was done correctly. So, let's move on to a doorway. So we got the other doorway over there for the closet to do, but that's got a little bit of modifications. I need to tear out a piece, my wife decided. Anyway, so we're gonna go over here first. And I wanna show you just basically that you can either measure, mark, take the drywall down and then cut it, and then put it back up and screw it in place. Or you might as well just put the whole thing in place, screw it in place, and then cut the piece out that you need for the doorway. I think that's the easiest way to do it. Okay, so I got this in place right about where I want it. Make sure this sheet is nice and plumb. I'm gonna get it up about the height I want it, and I'm gonna put a screw in it. Okay, we're moving now to the inside of that doorway, opposite of where we were, and we're just gonna use our oscillating tool here and cut out the door frame. I think that's the easiest way to do it. And there's your doorway. All right, we are really getting somewhere now. Before we move on, I was telling you, my wife wants this piece of wall removed here. She wants a matching railing, and I agree. It'll look really nice to have a, you know, fancy railing coming down both sides. So we're gonna take out this little piece of knee wall here, and from what I can see, they build it completely separately except for the bottom plate. The bottom plate extends all the way under it, so I need to cut this bottom plate right here, and then a couple of wrecking bars, and just very carefully remove the whole knee wall. There we go. We are getting close here. Yeah, almost to the point where we're gonna start putting finishes on. So now that all the drywall is done, the next thing we wanna do is we're gonna put on corner bead. This is called corner bead, and it's a very, very thin metal at a 90-degree angle, and it goes over your corners, your unfinished corners. Now you should notice here, I put very few screws in these corners. As a matter of fact, this one has hardly any at all, because there's gonna be screws going through the corner bead and through the drywall and into the framing. So why put more screws in than you need to, right? So anyway, you start with your corner bead. I'm gonna have to cut it to length here. I'll just use some metal snips, cut it, and we'll fit it in there. Yeah, so after you measure it to length, you're just going to take your tin snips and cut it right about where you need to cut it. Cut the sides first, cutting towards the corner, and then you can pretty much just jiggle this and it'll come right off. So now you got it cut to length. You're just going to set it in place and push it pretty snugly up against. Just make it stretch a little bit, you know, give it a little bit of a push. Don't dent it or ruin the thin metal. And it's a good idea to wear gloves because this stuff is such thin metal it could cut you. It's pretty sharp. So anyway, once you get it pushed in place and the drywall is good and snug, you're just gonna go ahead and put your drywall screws in through these little holes. And you don't need a whole bunch of them, just enough to hold it in place. Very, very nice. Okay, corner bead is installed everywhere that there is a corner. And now we're moving on to mud, which is my least favorite step. And I can't give you any real tips. I'm not a pro at this. All I know is if it isn't perfect, put more on and then let it dry and then sand it off. So I end up with at least 3 coats of this stuff, sometimes 4. And this is a finishing step. What you see, you get. So all you're gonna do is paint over this and change the color of it. So if it's not perfect, sand it down, and if you see a divot, put more over it, let it dry, sand it down, put more over it, sand it, you know, just keep doing it over and over and over again. You're gonna need just a regular putty knife for doing like the screw heads and stuff, and then one that's a bit wider to do the seams. The tape that I like to use this fiber tape that's self-adhesive for all the seams. It's easier to just slap it on there and then put mud over top of it. So take your time, put some music on, just enjoy the process. I'm not gonna make you watch me do this. We'll time lapse it and I'll show you what it looks like when it's done. there's a look at my finished drywall. Well, almost finished. One more step before I can paint it. And let me tell you, I'm really looking forward to putting some paint on this wall. So just a couple, I'm no professional drywall finisher. I'm just a DIY guy like you might be. A couple of things. Your first coat, just get it on, get it thick. You're gonna have to sand it anyway. I used an electric sander. I'm not gonna do that again. I went ahead and bought one of those sanders that you vacuum, you can stick your shop vac onto it. I think that's gonna be a good idea for the rest of this. I've never used one before, but it seems like a good idea. Second coat, try and be a little bit more careful, you know, spread it nice and smooth as you can get it. Always use that wide trowel, especially for the second and third coats. Then the third coat, I went with a thinner joint compound. This is already pre-mixed and everything. You could just take the whatever joint compound you're using and you can wet it down, just add water to it and dilute it. But a thinner final coat is better because it's going to spread more evenly and it'll be easier to sand. It'll give you a nice smooth finish. Then my final step is I'm going to go over the entire wall with a damp sponge, just a damp sponge. It doesn't have to be super wet. What that does is it just really blends everything nicely. You don't want to wipe it too much. Just get a nice smooth finish over your screw heads and then do back and forth across your seams. That's going to smooth out any of the roughness left by the sandpaper. You know, use a fine grit sandpaper, of course, but then this sponge is just going to smooth out anything that might have been left behind. Now, of course, got done sponging everything and I saw some small imperfections. Remember, if it's a bump, you can sand it off. If it's a little bit of a divot, you're going to have to go back and you're going to have to fill that. So these are just little pinhole type things. I'm being a perfectionist about this because if you can see it now, you will be able to see it through the paint. So try to take your time and be a perfectionist about it. It'll pay off in the end. Also, this is a several day process. From the very first coat to the last coat took me at least 3 days of letting it dry, sanding it, and the first coat has to dry overnight. You're putting so much compound on it, it's gonna need a long time to dry. So I'm gonna go ahead and just touch up these tiny little spots. They will dry within an hour and it'll be ready for paint. Okay, finally, we are now ready for paint. I got this as good as my capabilities will allow, and I think it's pretty darn good. Just, you know, use a bright light, shine it on the wall, go through with a fine-tooth comb and find all the little spots, and we're ready. Now, the best part about painting, it's your finish, you know, you're gonna see what you built, you know, the final result. This is the easiest painting you're ever gonna do. Just get a roller and start going. There's no cutting, there's no trimming around things. I'm going to leave a space along the top and along the edges where drywall will eventually butt up against it. So there's gonna be a tape joint and I'll need to put mud in there and everything. So I do not wanna paint up too high and I don't wanna paint all the way to the ends. So anyway, it's painting. You don't need to watch me paint. Time lapse it and let's get it done. Well, would you look at this? I've never been more excited to watch paint dry. Yeah, this may seem strange, but this right here, this painted wall is just, oh, it's wonderful. Anyway, that's a big step. It's a motivator, that's right. You get the discipline and then you get the motivation. Get through all the discipline. Ah, can you tell? Yeah. All right, well, that's it for this video. Not a whole lot of takeaways. You know, I guess the biggest point is just take your time with that drywall mud. If you're not a professional, these guys that do this every day, Oh, it's an art. I mean, it's just, and you just have to keep going until it's perfect. And then you end up with this. Yeah, never been so excited to watch paint dry. Anyway, I hope you're appreciating these videos. We're coming right along, and you know, there's going to be a whole series of these. I'll create a playlist and everything, and you know, we'll see where we go next. I think next we're going to be doing some electrical. Yeah, we'll get these electrical outlets wired in. I'm pulling the electrical off of an existing circuit, so not a whole lot of, you know, getting into the breaker box or anything like that. It's pretty simple. And we'll get these wired up, and then I've got some doors to put in, and we're gonna be pretty much done with this phase one of this project. So next video, you have to tune in. I'll show you the whole finished thing. So anyway, I appreciate you stopping by. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe, stick with me. We do a lot more than just this on this channel, so just keep watching, and I'll see you next time when I'm doing more stuff.